Allah's blessing and peace upon the Prophet whenever his name is mentioned. The Islamic Foundation presents The Persecutor Comes Home, the story of Umar and his conversion to Islam.
Umar could not sleep any longer. He got out of bed, opened the door of his house, and went outside. The full moon shone above the rooftops, and the streets were empty and still. After a while, Umar noticed a man walking briskly towards the Kaaba. His steps were measured, and he walked as if he was climbing a gentle slope. He was neither tall nor short, yet he seemed to tower over all his surroundings. Umar immediately recognized him as being the man he hated most. The man who had brought so much trouble to the people of Mecca by calling them to a new religion. The man who challenged all the gods they had been worshipping for ages as false and powerless, and instead invited them to serve the one God alone. The man who had divided the Quraysh, father against son, brother against brother, husband against wife. As Umar watched Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him, for that is who it was walking towards the Kaaba, he was reminded of the very scene which had kept him restless all night, causing him to wander out into the street while everyone else was sleeping. Abdullah's lovely face flashed before his eyes. "Yes, Umar, you have made life unbearable for us," she had told him. His own cousin, Abdullah, a member of one of the most respected families of Mecca, had defied him and was leaving for Abyssinia with many other young men and women who were following Muhammad. Umar had never imagined that Abdullah would be amongst those who would be forced to leave Mecca. True, he had been responsible for making life miserable for Muhammad's companions. As a result, one by one they had deserted their families, and each broken family filled Umar with greater wrath against Muhammad. Yet he never thought that they would ever leave their ancestral homes. That morning he had gone to Abdullah's house to see what her plans were, and had found her in the midst of making preparations for a long journey. Umar had said, "What? You too are leaving?" And she had replied with those words so full of hurt and reproach, "Yes, Umar, you have made life unbearable for us. Our only crime has been to believe in the one God. We have complete trust in him. We know that he will guide and protect us so that we may be allowed to serve him and worship him in peace." On any other occasion, Umar would have hit her. The very thought was unbearable for him. Members of his own tribe embracing Islam and following Muhammad, the renegade. But at the same time, the sight of these noble sons and daughters of the Quraysh leaving Mecca for no other crime than that of professing a new faith filled him with grief. He had not been able to answer her. His heart ached, and his eyes filled with tears. His mouth opened to utter a curse, but to his astonishment, he found himself saying, "God be with you, then." Abdullah was taken aback. She had never known Umar to be soft-hearted. On the contrary, he was one of the fiercest, toughest men in Mecca. A ray of hope entered her heart. Could it be that even the indomitable Umar would bend before the power of truth? In the evening, when her husband returned home, she told him about Umar's visit. She voiced her hope that Umar would someday at least be sympathetic to their cause, if not to embrace it. "So, because he did not curse you, you think he might someday join us?" her husband Amir asked. "Well, yes, I have some hope," she replied. But Amir shook his head. "Old Khattab's ass might embrace Islam, maybe, but Khattab's son? Ha, never." Umar's conversation with Abdullah had left a strong impression on him. His conscience was disturbed, and he was ill at ease. Why should people who had lived all their lives in Mecca be forced to leave only because their beliefs were different? Umar could not fully justify to himself the persecution which he in part had been responsible for. He hated himself for it, but because his pride would not allow him to admit it, he was condemned to sleepless nights. It was on one of those nights that he saw the blessed Prophet Muhammad on his way to the Kaaba. The very sight of the man enraged him. Was he not the root of all the trouble, the reason why families were split apart and young people were misled? And there he was, free to walk the streets and to worship in the sacred house. Umar was furious. He muttered, "Umar, you are the most feared man in Mecca. You hate Islam and all that it stands for, and more than anything, you hate that wretched man there that strolls by your door as if he had none to fear. Therefore, you should keep an eye on him." And so saying, Umar followed the lonely silhouette down the streets to the Kaaba. As he entered the Haram, the blessed Prophet Muhammad was already there, facing north towards Jerusalem, performing his prayers and glorifying God. Umar had never actually heard what Muhammad said he had received from God, because of prejudice and indifference. He did not want to hear. But Abdullah's face appeared again before him as he stood in the darkness of the Haram, and his curiosity became aroused. What spell or magic could there be in those words to cause people to give up their livelihood and their customs to follow him? By God, Umar feared no man, no magic of any kind, for he was the strongest man in Mecca. Lifting his arm, he pushed aside the heavy cloth that draped the Kaaba and hid behind it. Then he slowly inched forward, nearer to the blessed Prophet Muhammad. "Talk, Muhammad," he muttered between clenched teeth. "Let us hear the magic words. Spin your witchcraft for Umar." As if in answer, the blessed Prophet Muhammad's voice rang out clearly.
الحاقة ما الحاقة وما أدراك ما الحاقة.
The sure reality. What is the sure reality? And what will make thee realize what the sure reality is? Umar leaned forward so as not to miss a word.
وجاء فرعون ومن قبله والمؤتفكات بالخاطئة فعصوا رسول ربهم فأخذهم أخذة رابية.
And Pharaoh and those before him and the cities overthrown committed habitual sin and disobeyed each the messenger of their Lord, so he seized them with an increasing penalty.
يومئذ تعرضون لا تخفى منكم خافية.
That day shall ye be brought to judgment, not an act of yours that ye hide will be hidden.
فأما من أوتي كتابه بيمينه فيقول هاؤم اقرءوا كتابيه.
Then he that will be given his record in his right hand will say, "Ah, here, read ye my record."
وأما من أوتي كتابه بشماله فيقول يا ليتني لم أوت كتابيه.
And he that will be given his record in his left hand will say, "Ah, would that my record had not been given to me."
ما أغنى عني ماليه هلك عني سلطانيه.
Of no profit to me has been my wealth, my power has gone from me.
إنه كان لا يؤمن بالله العظيم ولا يحض على طعام المسكين فليس له اليوم هاهنا حميم ولا طعام إلا من غسلين.
This was he that would not believe in God Most High, and would not urge the feeding of the needy. So no friend hath he here this day, nor hath he any food except the foul pus from the wounds. The fearful and penetrating words of the Quran struck Umar to the heart. He caught his breath as if stunned, and was forced to consider its meaning. Truly, it has power, for I can recognize power, but it is in the form of poetry. Powerful poetry, that is it. It is this poetry which has corrupted the people of the Quraysh. But the blessed Prophet Muhammad's words broke through Umar's thoughts.
إنه لقول رسول كريم وما هو بقول شاعر قليلا ما تؤمنون.
This is verily the word of an honored messenger. It is not the word of a poet. Little it is ye believe. Umar was completely taken aback. Was this man able to read his thoughts? If he could read people's thoughts, then he must be a kahin, a soothsayer, able to read the secrets that lay in people's hearts. Again, the blessed Prophet Muhammad's words held his attention.
ولا بقول كاهن قليلا ما تذكرون تنزيل من رب العالمين.
Nor is it the word of a soothsayer. Little it is ye remember. This is a message sent down from the Lord of the worlds.
ولو تقول علينا بعض الأقاويل لأخذنا منه باليمين ثم لقطعنا منه الوتين.
And if the messenger were to invent any sayings in our name, we should certainly seize him by his right hand, and we should certainly then cut off the artery of his heart. Never before had Umar been confronted with such a situation. The argument was overpowering. If Muhammad were lying, if he had not received a message from God, then surely his God would destroy him. Umar could take no more. Confused and perplexed, he stepped out from behind the curtain, turned his back on the Kaaba, and walked slowly along the deserted road to his house. Above the rooftops of Makkah, a pink veil covered the sky, as if in the receding darkness a dawn of hope was rising over the city. So it was in Umar's turbulent heart. For a moment it seemed as if the darkness had lifted, allowing a glimmer of understanding and faith to enter, but in fact the real battle within Umar had just begun. He felt this glimmer of understanding to be a weakness, and this only increased his stubbornness and anger. A part of him would have liked to wipe out all that he had heard that night, as well as the face and words of Abdullah, so that he could remain undisturbed, but this was not to be. Another part of him, deep within, recognized the blessed Prophet Muhammad as being sincere, a man of integrity, whose message was closer to the truth than anything Umar had ever learned from his forefathers, than all the superstitions which had held his heart and mind in chains since his youth. Even so, he could not bring himself to give up the old beliefs for the sake of one man's claim, for the sake of a mere woman's words. It was in this state of mind that Umar, under the pink light of dawn, entered his house and closed the door. The newly converted Muslims were a tortured and persecuted minority in Makkah. They could neither profess their faith openly nor could they pray in the Haram, and Umar's fierce opposition played a large part in creating this situation. They were few, and their opponents and persecutors were many, but none of them was as active and zealous as Umar. The blessed Prophet's headquarters were located by the side of Mount Safa, in the house of his close companion Arqam. His followers would come and stay with him for several days and nights at a time, learning the Quran by heart, talking with him about Islam, and discussing amongst themselves how best to survive in a community which had rejected them, and how best to prepare themselves for the great struggle which they knew lay ahead. The blessed Prophet had divided his Muslim community into groups, and each group was entrusted to the care and guidance of one of the blessed Prophet's senior followers. Besides coming to the house of Arqam, they would also visit each other's houses, reciting and remembering and understanding the latest revelations, learnt from the blessed Prophet, and recording on leaves and bits of parchments the verses which were later to become the surahs of the Quran. Unbeknown to Umar, his own sister Fatima and her husband Saeed housed one of these centers, for they too had become Muslims. One morning, in the blessed Prophet's house, the conversation had been particularly discouraging. News had reached them that Abu Jahl, another fierce enemy of Islam, and Umar had planned for several of the followers to be beaten and insulted. It seemed to the group seated in the blessed Prophet's house that they had no other recourse but to hide or flee. "The trouble is, there aren't enough of us to resist," said one. "Look at us. Some of us former slaves, most of us too young. What can we do against the mighty Quraysh? What we need is a few strong people of our own." The others smiled sadly in agreement, and they all sat thinking over what had just been said. Slowly, the blessed Prophet, who was sitting close by, raised his hands to God and prayed. "O Allah, lend strength to Islam. Guide to Islam Abu Jahl, son of Hisham, or Umar, son of Khattab. O Allah, whichever of these men you love more, guide him to Islam." Everyone there who had heard the prayer repeated it silently in his own heart, and when the blessed Prophet sat down again, they murmured as if in one voice a quiet Ameen. Umar, meanwhile, was more miserable than ever. By night the scene in the Haram continued to haunt him. The verses from the Quran which the blessed Prophet had recited haunted his dreams and kept him from sleep. "That day shall ye be brought to judgment, not an act of yours that ye hide shall be hidden." By day Umar's fury against the blessed Prophet grew and grew. One particular morning he reached a swift decision. "Why, what is the matter with me?" he declared aloud, as he paced back and forth in his room. "I see no problem at all. If there is a boil festering on your body, just slice it off. It's as simple as that." He reached for his sword. "If there is one scum destroying an entire city, then cut him down." He was astonished that he had not thought of it before. Umar, like all fierce men of action, believed that an idea could be crushed by force, and he could not wait once he had decided to use force. He had not yet understood that when a great truth, a great belief is born amongst people, and they are committed to it, it cannot be wiped out by force. Unaware of the forces that were surrounding him, Umar marched out of the house, sword in hand. To the passer-by in the street on that day in Mecca, this rough giant wielding a naked sword would not easily go unnoticed. It was not long before he came across his cousin Nu'aym, son of Abdullah al-Naham. Nu'aym's eyes fell upon the gleaming blade in Umar's fist. It did not speak well of his designs. Nu'aym tried to remain calm. "Where to, Umar?" he asked. Umar's face was white with determination. "Where to? Ha! Good question. To put an end to it. That's what. Put an end to that heretic who has divided the Quraysh and condemns the religion of our forefathers, who abuses our idols." Umar's voice rose to a high pitch, and people living along the street peered fearfully from their windows at the sound. "He shall condemn no more!" Umar's sword slashed the air. Nu'aym's heart sank. How would he ever stop this fanatic? Quickly he thought of something to say which would slow Umar's rush towards the blessed Prophet's house. "Whoever gave you the idea you could kill Muhammad and get away with it? Do you think that if you succeed, his family would leave you alive? Do you not realize what a blood retribution they would take on our tribe, the Banu Adi?" Umar shouted back his answer, and a terrible argument followed, each man out-yelling the other. "I see now," yelled Umar. "You too are a heretic. Come here, and I shall cure you of your illness." Summoning up his courage, Nu'aym answered, "You are so sure of yourself, Umar, you fool. You don't even know that your own sister is a Muslim. Yes, Fatima and her husband Saeed. They're a lot wiser than you are. They don't stupidly cling to evil ways once they've heard the truth." You lie! Gasped Umar, whose eyes bulged dangerously at this preposterous news. Abruptly he shifted direction from the blessed Prophet's house to that of his sisters. Nu'aym, seeing what he was about, tried to block the path, but Umar shoved him aside. "Then they shall be the first to die," he shouted, moving off with gigantic strides. But the road leading to Fatima's house was a long one, and by the time Umar reached her door, some of his anger had spent itself. He stopped to catch his breath before pounding on the door with the butt of his sword, and in so doing, he caught the sound of voices chanting in unison.
ما أنزلنا عليك القرآن لتشقى إلا تذكرة لمن يخشى بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم طه
He hesitated an instant, listening, then pounded on the door with all his strength. Within, Fatima, her husband Said, and Khabbab, the instructor, were reciting the most recent words of Allah they had been taught by the blessed Prophet. They halted, shocked at the intrusion. "Who is there?" called Fatima. "Umar, son of Khattab." At the sound of Umar's voice, Khabbab, a fragile man, disappeared into the inner room. "Quick," whispered Said, "hide the parchments." Fatima slid them inside her garment, close to her chest, and quickly composed herself. Umar knocked again, louder, and Said opened the door to reveal Umar's great form brandishing a sword. "What was all that muttering? Don't think I didn't hear you." Nothing, replied Fatima calmly. "We were just talking." "Liars! Cowards! I know you are heretics!" Fatima and Said looked at each other. Now that Umar knew, there was nothing to conceal. "The truth is not what you believe it to be," said Said calmly. This was too much for Umar. Losing all control, he lunged forward and grabbed Said by the beard. Said, in trying to defend himself, fell backwards on the floor. Umar, seizing the advantage, leapt on his chest, pinned him down, and brandished his sword above his head. Fatima cried out, ran to her husband, and grabbing Umar's tunic, pulled it with all her strength to drag him from Said's chest. "Umar, get off! Let him go!" Umar, exasperated at the interruption, slapped her hard in the face. A trickle of blood ran down Fatima's cheek. Hurt and bleeding, she faced Umar bravely. "Oh, enemy of God," she said, "you hate us only because we believe in the one God." "That's right," said Umar. "Then do what you like with us, Umar," replied Fatima, her voice like steel. "We bear witness that there is no God but the one God, and that Muhammad is his prophet. Nothing you can do will change that, however much you hate it. We shall never abandon Islam." The determination and courage in his sister's voice so impressed Umar that it acted like a shower of cold water over his rage. Slowly the anger drained from his features. He relaxed his hold on Said and drew himself up to his full height. "All right, sister." Umar's voice was calmer now. "Then let me see what it is you are reading. If there is any sense in it, you could at least share it with me." Fatima hesitated and looked at her husband. "I promise not to throw it away. I'll return it to you," Umar assured her. "Very well," said Fatima. "But go and wash first. You are in no condition to touch the words of God." As Umar left the room, Khabbab, the instructor, emerged from the other room and scolded them in a loud whisper. "How can you trust an infidel and a man of such violence?" "I know my brother," answered Fatima, "and I have high hopes that Allah will direct him to the right path." Khabbab, seeing Umar returning, disappeared again into the back room. With a silent prayer, Fatima handed the pieces of parchment to her brother. Umar read,
سبح لله ما في السماوات والأرض وهو العزيز الحكيم له ملك السماوات والأرض يحيي ويميت وهو على كل شيء قدير هو الأول والآخر والظاهر والباطن وهو بكل شيء عليم.
Whatever is in the heavens and on earth, let it declare the praises and glory of God. For he is the exalted in might, the wise. To him belongs the kingdom of heavens and the earth. It is he who gives life and death, and he has power over all things. He is the first and the last, the evident and the imminent, and he has full knowledge of all things.
هو الذي خلق السماوات والأرض في 6 أيام ثم استوى على العرش يعلم ما يلج في الأرض وما يخرج منها وما ينزل من السماء وما يعرج فيها وهو معكم أينما كنتم والله بما تعملون بصير.
He it is who created the heaven and the earth in 6 days, and moreover firmly sits on the throne of authority. He knows what enters within the earth and what comes forth out of it, what comes down from heavens and what mounts up to it. And he is with you wheresoever ye may be, and God sees well all that ye do.
له ملك السماوات والأرض وإلى الله ترجع الأمور يولج الليل في النهار ويولج النهار في الليل وهو عليم بذات الصدور.
To him belongs the kingdom of the heavens and the earth, and all affairs are referred back to God. He merges night into day, and he merges day into night, and he has full knowledge of the secrets of all hearts. Previously, Umar would not have understood the words on the parchment. They would have been as a foreign language to him, but now he immediately understood them, and they were clearly the truth. A conviction filled him as he read on, realizing for the first time that all along he had been mistaken, and that Muhammad was indeed the messenger from the one God. For indeed, how could there be other gods besides the one God?
ما أنزلنا عليك القرآن لتشقى إلا تذكرة تذكرة لمن يخشى.
We have not sent down the Qur'an to thee to be an occasion for thy distress, but only as an admonition to those who fear God.
تنزيلا ممن خلق الأرض والسماوات العلى الرحمن على العرش استوى. له ما في السماوات وما في الأرض وما بينهما وما تحت الثرى.
A revelation from him who created the earth and the heavens on high. God, most gracious, firmly sits on the throne of authority. To him belongs what is in the heavens and on earth, and all between them, and all beneath the soil.
فلما أتاها نودي يا موسى إني أنا ربك فاخلع عليك إنك بالواد المقدس طوى وأنا اخترتك فاستمع لما يوحى.
But when he came to the fire, a voice was heard, O Moses, verily I am thy Lord, therefore in my presence put off thy shoes. Thou art in the sacred valley Tuwa. I have chosen thee, listen then to the inspiration sent to thee.
إنني أنا الله لا إله إلا أنا فاعبدني وأقم الصلاة لذكري.
Verily I am God, there is no God but I. So serve thou me only, and establish regular prayer for celebrating my praise.
إن الساعة آتية أكاد أخفيها لتجزى كل نفس بما تسعى.
Verily, the hour is coming. My design is to keep it hidden for every soul to receive its reward, but the measure of its endeavor.
فلا يصدنك عنها من لا يؤمن بها واتبع هواه فتردى.
Therefore let not such as believe not therein, but follow their own lusts, divert thee therefrom, lest thou perish. Enough. I need read no more, declared Omar with conviction. It is preposterous to associate anyone with the one God. How could I have ever believed otherwise? Quick! Where is Muhammad? Tell me. Sister and brother-in-law stood and looked at Omar, unsure of his true intentions. Khabbab came out of his hiding place and whispered to Sa'id, "Do you think that maybe the Prophet's prayer is going to be fulfilled?" But Sa'id said nothing. Then, glancing at Fatima for approval, he finally told Umar where the blessed Prophet Muhammad could be found. Umar sheathed his sword, slung it over his shoulder, and started off for Dar Arqam, where the blessed Prophet was staying. Inside Dar Arqam, the blessed Prophet and his followers were seated reciting a surah, whilst Hamza and Talha were standing guard at the door. Umar knocked. "Who is there?" asked Talha. "Umar," came the response. The entire assembly looked up in amazement. What could he want, other than to persecute or to insult them? Dare they let him in? Hamza, seeing that the companions were doubtful, spoke up. "We should not fear him," he said. "If he has come with good intention, then he will embrace Islam. If not, why look around? There are enough of us to tackle one man, surely." Talha, at a sign from Hamza, unbarred the door and opened it. As soon as Umar stepped inside, Hamza and Talha seized his arms and took him to where the blessed Prophet was sitting. The blessed Prophet looked up. "Let him go," he told them, and moved calmly towards Umar. Umar made not a move. The blessed Prophet reached up to Umar's neck, took hold of his sword strap, and pulled the sword towards him. Umar, strong and ferocious, stood before his enemy, but was incapable of making a move. He began to tremble and shake from his head to his feet. The blessed Prophet looked into his eyes. "Umar," he said, "give up your wrong ways before God's curse falls upon you. Umar, accept Islam. Oh Allah, guide his heart to the right path." "What should I say?" stammered Umar. Hamza spoke up. "Say that you bear witness that there is but one God and that Muhammad is his messenger." Umar looked at Hamza, then at the blessed Prophet. I bear witness," he began. The followers were all watching him with bated breath. Umar had stopped shaking and now drew himself up to his full height. "I bear witness there is but one God and that you, Muhammad, are his true messenger." At the declaration of the kalima spoken by Umar, the Muslims could contain themselves no longer. They all cried as in one voice, "Allahu Akbar! God is the most great." The shouting was so loud and so full of joy, they say, that it resounded throughout the streets of Makkah. Umar, caught up in the enthusiasm of his newly found faith and the reaction of the believers, shouted with them the very words which he had so often scowled at a short time ago. "Allahu Akbar! Allahu Akbar! Allahu Akbar! Allahu Akbar! Allahu Akbar!" From that moment on, Umar brought the Muslims the strength, courage, and leadership abilities which he had once used against them. Immediately he became as enthusiastic and loud in his support of Islam as he had been before in opposing it. "Tell me, O Messenger of God," he asked, "are we not in the path of the truth, whether we live or die?" "Yes, surely," replied the blessed Prophet. "It is time now for us to go out openly and claim our right to pray in the Kaaba." "Well then," said Umar, turning to the others with outstretched arms, "let us go and pray in front of whomever we will. Now that Umar is with you, there is no need to hide from anyone." The blessed Prophet nodded, smiled, and gave his consent. Out of Arqam's house they marched in 2 rows, one led by Umar and the other by Hamza, Makkah's 2 fearless leaders. Down the street they filed, to the surprise of citizens along the way. Into the haram they went, and before the eyes of their astounded opponents began their Islamic prayer. Now that Umar had become a Muslim, he was also ashamed, deep down, of the persecution he had inflicted on his fellow believers. He was eager to right the matter by putting himself in the same position. The first person to whom he thought of declaring his new belief was the greatest enemy of Islam, the blessed Prophet's uncle and respected leader of the Quraysh, Abu Jahl himself. So the very next day after his declaration, Omar went straight to Abu Jahl's house. With head held high and shoulders squared, he knocked loudly. "Who is there?" asked Abu Jahl. "Son of Khattab," replied Omar, and Abu Jahl opened the door. Omar looked down on the venerated leader of the Quraysh. "I have come to announce," he declared, "that I have given up the religion of my forefathers." Umar awaited the expected attack in either words or action, but none came. Abu Jahl was stunned. "The man is drunk," he thought to himself, "or he's had too much sun. I'd better humor him rather than turn that giant's wrath upon me." "Really?" he croaked. "Yes, really," roared Umar, expecting a fight. But Abu Jahl just stood a moment, then said in a low voice, "Don't do that, Umar." Umar became frustrated. "I shall never give up Islam. Never." Abu Jahl, shocked, angry and afraid, hurriedly retreated inside his house and slammed the door in Umar's face. Umar could not believe it. Nothing had come of his announcement. Turning on his heel, he marched down the street and knocked on the door of two more tribal chiefs. One, deciding that Umar must be drunk, refused to argue with him, and the other quickly changed the subject of conversation. Umar shook his head in bewilderment. What was wrong with these people that they didn't want to challenge him? He tried declaring his belief to a third man who was walking in his direction. Realizing that Umar was serious, the man told him, "Look, Umar, if you really want everyone to know that you have embraced Islam, then you should go and tell Jamil, son of Muammar, the greatest gossip in town. Once he hears about it, the news will spread like wildfire." Umar thought this was an excellent idea, so at dusk, when everyone had assembled in the haram, Umar went up to Jamil and told him of his conversion to Islam. Jamil couldn't wait. Bursting with this astounding piece of news, he cried aloud to all present, "Lo, citizens of Makkah, the son of Khattab has become a heretic." But Umar would have none of that. "Idiot," he said, pushing him aside. "This man's a liar," he shouted. "Now hear the truth. Umar, son of Khattab, have declared for all the world to hear, there is no God but the one God, and Muhammad is his messenger."
وأشهد أن محمدًا رسول الله.
The assembly was appalled. What was happening here? The enemy of Muhammad had become a turncoat and was now on his side? So shocked were the braver ones by this announcement, they forgot about Umar's powerful build and rushed at him, beating him with their fists and threatening him with their swords. This was exactly what Umar wanted. One by one he fought them off, a blow here, a sword slash there. "This follower of Muhammad is no weakling," he cried. "Taste the sword of Allah." Umar received quite a few blows in the skirmish. But in the end, the attackers all fell back to nurse their wounds, and Umar stood alone in the empty haram, having tasted the pain of chastisement as well as the fruits of victory.
Muslims are required to invoke Allah's blessing and peace upon the Prophet whenever his name is mentioned. In the name of God, most gracious, most merciful. Verily, this is the word of an honored apostle. It is not the word of a poet. Little it is ye believe.
إنه لقول رسول كريم وما هو بقول شاعر قليلا ما تؤمنون.
Nor is it the word of a soothsayer. Little admonition it is ye receive. This is a message sent down from the Lord of the worlds.
ولا بقول كاهن قليلا ما تذكرون. تنزيل من رب العالمين.
The Islamic Foundation presents The Wise Poet, the story of Al-Tufail bin Amr, and how the best poetry cannot compete with the truth and wisdom of the Quran.
In the fertile valley of Tahama by the Red Sea, there once lived a respected chief called Al-Tufail. His tribe, the Daws, were a happy people. They were fortunate to have water in a land which was for the most part dry, and also to have a chief who was very kind and very wise. His door was always open to everyone, and he never tired of listening to people's problems and trying to solve them, or taking in strangers under his roof who were in danger from their enemies. He would help the poor, rescue the afflicted, and advise the desolate. It was said that his pots were never off the fire, and that his door was never closed to the passer-by. Not only was Tufail generous and kind, he was also very entertaining. He had a talent for making up marvelous poems, which he would recite in a sonorous voice. People looked forward to an evening sitting around Tufail's hearth after a long, hard day's work, listening to his latest poems, and perhaps joining in on the chorus. Tufail had poems for every occasion. He had love poems for the newly married, which made people dream of romance.
Are required to invoke Allah's blessing and peace upon the Prophet whenever his name is mentioned. In the name of God, most gracious, most merciful. Verily, this is the word of an honored apostle. It is not the word of a poet. Little it is ye believe.
إنه لقول رسول كريم وما هو بقول شاعر قليلا ما تؤمنون.
Nor is it the word of a soothsayer. Little admonition it is ye receive. This is a message sent down from the Lord of the worlds.
ولا بقول كاهن قليلا ما تذكرون. تنزيل من رب العالمين.
The Islamic Foundation presents The Wise Poet, the story of Al-Tufail bin Amr, and how the best poetry cannot compete with the truth and wisdom of the Quran.
In the fertile valley of Tahama by the Red Sea, there once lived a respected chief called Al-Tufail. His tribe, the Daws, were a happy people. They were fortunate to have water in a land which was for the most part dry, and also to have a chief who was very kind and very wise. His door was always open to everyone, and he never tired of listening to people's problems and trying to solve them, or taking in strangers under his roof who were in danger from their enemies. He would help the poor, rescue the afflicted, and advise the desolate. It was said that his pots were never off the fire, and that his door was never closed to the passer-by. Not only was Tufail generous and kind, he was also very entertaining. He had a talent for making up marvelous poems, which he would recite in a sonorous voice. People looked forward to an evening sitting around Tufail's hearth after a long, hard day's work, listening to his latest poems, and perhaps joining in on the chorus. Tufail had poems for every occasion. He had love poems for the newly married, which made people dream of romance, poems of sadness on the occasion of a death, and poems of rejoicing to celebrate a victory. He also made up poems of worship for the favorite idol of the Dawes tribe, whose image stood in the holy Kaaba in Makkah. There was nothing Tufail liked better than a visit to Makkah. There he would meet with all his city friends, with whom he usually did very good business, and who on these occasions would serve him delicious meals and tell him the latest news and gossip from around Arabia. On these visits to Makkah he faithfully went on pilgrimage to the tribe's favorite idols, upon which he would shower offerings, and to whom he would recite long verses of supplication and praise. Tufail was in the process of composing a long poem to his favorite idol in view of his approaching visit to Makkah, when he heard from a passing tribesman who had stopped by for a meal a most disturbing story. The traveler shook his head while swallowing a last portion of lamb. Terrible! It is terrible! I tell you, the madness which has come over that town is terrible. A young upstart claims he's been sent by God. Awful for the Quraysh. They don't know what to do about him. Tufail couldn't make much sense out of the traveler's story. Obviously, the Quraysh were in some kind of trouble, and it was Tufail's nature to want to hurry there and see if he could help them. After all, the Quraysh are my friends, and if I could find out what's going on, I could probably help sort out their problems, he thought to himself. In Makkah, meanwhile, at a gathering of the Quraysh, one of the merchants was talking. I hear Tufail is on his way to Makkah. Now, you all know how his word is respected in the valley of Tahama, and in the entire region for that matter. People listen to him and follow his advice, so we must see to it that he doesn't fall under the spell of this Muhammad. We don't want him wandering around the Kaaba for hours, where he might hear the magic poems and become spellbound, as some of our foolish people have allowed themselves to be. We must speak to him first and warn him of this witchcraft. Excellent idea, replied his neighbor. I'll take care of him at my house on this visit. We'll show him who his friends are, we'll make him feel welcome and relaxed, and then we shall warn him. This is the absorbing story which many years later Al-Tufail recounted to all who would listen. Now, when one of my friends of the Quraysh welcomed me to his home, I could hardly believe my eyes. He had laid out a magnificent feast with roast lamb, sweetmeats, and many kinds of fruit. He escorted me to a comfortable, cool room with silken cushions and golden lamps. What is the special occasion? I asked my friend. Why, your arrival in Makkah, my good Tufail, he answered, all of which I thought a bit peculiar, since I had been his guest before. Very well treated, of course, but never in such a grandiose style. Naturally, I began to wonder what it all meant. You cannot fool a wise old man like me, you know. Something is afoot, I said to myself. You had better be prepared. Well, the next day, the Quraysh all gathered around, and between the dates and the milk, their talk came around to what was bothering them. Tufail, the elder said, you have come to our city just when we are in the midst of a great deal of trouble. This man called Muhammad, who is self-proclaimed prophet, has caused disruption and disunity among the members of our clan, turning father against son and son against father and husband against wife and brother against brother. The elder stopped to pour me a goblet of wine and then continued, He is a very dangerous influence, and we do not want to see the same calamity happen to your tribe. We suggest you keep far away from him so that none of his magic can influence you. They kept on all evening with dire warnings until I finally began to believe that some harm might well befall my people and myself. Well, to cut a long story short, I promised them I would stay away from Muhammad and not listen to a word he was saying. Next morning I woke up bright and early and saw that it was going to be a beautiful day. I washed and donned my best cloak and took the offerings which the tribe had prepared for the idols. Just to be on the safe side, I borrowed from my host some cotton to put in my ears. I noticed that he nodded his head in agreement with this. As for me, I certainly didn't want to be within earshot of that Muhammad's magic words. So off I went to the Kaaba, where I carefully adorned the sacred idols with offerings and recited to our favorite idol the poem which I had composed to ensure that the tribe would prosper during the following year. I had just finished my recitation when I noticed, not far from me, a man doing the strangest thing. First he would stand and cross his hands on his chest, then he would bow as far as his knees, and then he would bow all the way to the ground like a slave. I had never seen anything like it, so I stood and watched him a while. How beautiful is his prayer, I thought, and without realizing it, I moved closer to him. Finally, I caught myself straining to hear what he was saying, and by that time I was close enough to hear his words in spite of the cotton in my ears. What a sensation ran through my body when I first heard those beautiful words.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله الذي أنزل على عبده الكتاب ولم يجعل له عوجا قيما لينذر بأسا شديدا من لدنه ويبشر المؤمنين الذين يعملون الصالحات أن لهم أجرا حسنا.
Like music from the heavens. It was nothing like my own poetry, like any poetry, because he spoke of far greater things, and his words were filled with understanding and grace. Tufail, I said to myself, you are no fool. You can discern good from bad, and if what you are hearing were magic or evil, you would know it, and you would run in the opposite direction. So instead of running, I followed him. I followed him out of the Kaaba and down the street until he came to the door of his house. As soon as he had entered, I knocked. What was I doing knocking at the door of a stranger, you might ask me, and one whom I had been warned about? Well, I had never in my life beheld a man such as this, and the marvelous feeling I had was still with me. The door opened, and he stood there, and he invited me in. You are the one they call Muhammad? I asked, just to be sure, and he nodded and smiled, and asked me to be seated. Well, Muhammad, I was so impressed by your prayers that I had to follow you. Let me tell you that my Quraysh friends spent the whole evening warning me against your magic verses and telling me of all the trouble you have been causing here in Mecca. I don't know whether or not they were speaking the truth, but one thing is certain. I was fated to stand beside you in the Kaaba and overhear your prayers in spite of the cotton I had plugged in my ears. I thought to myself, I am a sensible man, capable of knowing what is good and what is bad, what is evil and what is true, and I can tell you I was filled with joy. I was uplifted when I heard your voice, and my emotions were aroused when I saw the movements of your prayers. Therefore, I believe that what you have to tell is worthwhile, and I would like to hear more about your new religion, so that I may take the news to my people. Muhammad told me then that indeed he was appointed as a messenger of the one God. Following that, he recited to me verses of great beauty, which I have since learned by heart. Here is what he recited.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم قل هو الله أحد الله الصمد لم يلد ولم يولد ولم يكن له كفوا أحد.
Say, He is the one God, God the everlasting. He begets not, and neither is he begotten, and equal to him is not anyone.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم قل أعوذ برب الفلق من شر ما خلق ومن شر غاسق إذا وقب ومن شر النفاثات في العقد ومن شر حاسد إذا حسد.
Say, I seek refuge with the Lord of the daybreak from the evil of that which he has created, from the evil of the darkness when it cometh, from the evil of the women who blow on knots, from the evil of the envier when he envieth. You can understand that this is no ordinary poem composed by an ordinary poet like myself. Well, I could hold back no longer. Tears welled in my eyes, and I reached towards him and begged him to admit me to his religion, which he did right there and then. There is no other God but Allah, I recited after him, and Muhammad is his messenger. And that, my friends, is how on that bright sunny morning in Mecca I became a Muslim. Of course, you can see that I could not now return to my friends the Quraysh. The blessed Prophet, of course, understood that, and invited me to stay with his followers, who, in spite of their outward poverty and the fact that they had never seen me before in their lives, welcomed me with open arms as one of their brothers. During those weeks in Mecca, I learned as much as I could about Islam, and memorized many surahs. How strange it is, I thought to myself. All my life I had made up poems and verses which were then learned by others, and now it is I, an old poet, who's learning far more meaningful verses from a very young man. One morning I said to the blessed Prophet, "It is time now that I return to my people, for certainly they must be worried about my long absence. I hope that with God's help I shall be able to bring them all to Islam. But you know," I added confidentially, "even though I am their leader, they might not believe me at first. They might think that I'm mad to have given up the gods of my ancestors and changed my way of worship. Could you, O Prophet, pray for a sign from Allah that will help me in completing my task?" The blessed Prophet agreed and bade me farewell. I in turn thanked him and his followers for their warm and generous hospitality and started on my journey to the valley of Tahama. Now, I had not ridden as far as to catch a glimpse of the Red Sea when a peculiar thing happened. A light of some kind began hovering around my forehead, and no matter in which direction I turned, it remained there between my eyes as if to show me the way. This must be the sign from Allah, I said to myself. But what will my people say if they see me with this light shining between my eyes? Knowing them as I do, they will be sure that it is some kind of a curse put on me by the Makkans for having given up my old way of worship. They would never dare approach me to hear what I have to say. And so I prayed to God. Oh, Allah, I said, please, please may this light shine from another place instead of my face. Well, as soon as I opened my eyes, I noticed that my whip, which lay on the saddle of my horse, was now shining with a soft light. A whip, you know, is a symbol of leadership. So I thanked Allah with all my heart for having placed the light where my people would understand its meaning. On I rode, past the banks of the Red Sea to the valley of Tahama. As is the custom, some of the valley people who had seen me coming had run to tell the members of my family, who always liked to come and greet me on my return from Mecca. They were always anxious to hear about my adventures, my pilgrimage, and the good business ventures I had carried out for them. My father was the first to come forward, but this time I saw him in a different light. No longer was he the man to whom I could turn to for advice, but a man who was himself in need of guidance. "Please do not approach me, Father," I said. "We are no longer related as before. I no longer believe in the stone images of our forefathers, but have become a Muslim, which means I now believe in the one God and that the blessed Prophet Muhammad is his messenger." "Why, my son," he answered, "if that is so, then I will gladly follow your new belief. I have come to trust your good judgment." That is not as I expected him to answer, so you can imagine my joy at hearing these words. "Rejoice then, Father. Go now and wash off the past and the old ways from your body. Come to me clean and dressed in fresh clothing, and I shall teach you all I know about Islam, and we shall worship together." The next task I had before me was a much harder one. I had to tell my wife about my new religion, and she would have to agree to follow the same path. Again, to my surprise and delight, she promised that she would worship with me the one God and follow in the footsteps of the blessed Prophet Muhammad. That she did readily enough, but when I asked her to go to the spring of Al-Shara to purify herself, it was a different matter. Al-Shara, you know, was the idol of our tribe, and the water flowing from that area was considered sacred, not to be touched by man or beast, and certainly not to be bathed in. Well, she shrank back in fear at my words. "Dear husband," she said, "you know that such a thing is forbidden by our idol. Think of the terrible revenge she will take upon us and our children." "Nonsense," I cried, brandishing my whip with the strange light. "Do you think a dumb piece of stone can harm a human being?" My wife's face showed great relief. You see, she had never realized that the idol could neither walk nor talk, and so therefore was much lower than she. Well, she then went to the spring and came back beautifully clothed with a touch of sweet perfume, whereupon she willingly embraced Islam. Well, my friends, things did not go so easily with the rest of my people. Some, it is true, were willing to embrace Islam, but most of them would hear nothing of it. I brandished my whip and even threatened them, but they were more afraid of revenge from the idol than of all my rantings. My heart was heavy the next time I went to Mecca. I had to admit to the blessed Prophet that I had not been successful. And, moreover, I told him, not only do they reject the truth, but they continue in their old sinful and disobedient ways. Oh, messenger of God, please help me. Without saying a word, the blessed Prophet stood up, made ablution, and prayed silently. Then he raised his hands towards heaven. How frightened I was at that moment. I was sure he would call down a curse upon my people, and as a result they would all be horribly destroyed in some catastrophe. My heart sank with me, and I cried, "Oh, my people! Oh, my people!" Then I heard the blessed Prophet's voice, and he was praying, "Oh, Allah, give guidance to the doors. Give guidance to the doors. Give guidance to the doors. How I sighed with relief and gratefulness. The blessed Prophet then turned towards me and said, "Go back to your people. Live with them as you naturally would, and be kind to them, all the while reminding them of Islam. Be kind to them when you speak of Islam." Well, I had never thought to do that. I was so full of my purpose and so anxious to save them from hell that all I could do was rant and rave. But it appeared that it was best to be patient and kind. So that is what I tried to do. I carried out the blessed Prophet's advice as best as I could, and indeed, it really did work. After the Battle of the Ditch, I went again to see the blessed Prophet in Medina, this time accompanied by 80 families from the doors who had embraced Islam and were all good Muslims. My reward was to behold the blessed Prophet smile as he greeted each one and welcomed them to Medina. And that, my friends, is the story of how I came to find Islam, and how my tribe, in spite of some resistance, joined me in the worship of the one God.
Muslims are required to invoke Allah's blessing and peace upon the Prophet whenever his name is mentioned. The Islamic Foundation presents The Desert Chief, the story of Thumama ibn Uthal, and how the humane and dignified treatment accorded to him by the Blessed Prophet and his companions made him become a Muslim.
In the 6th year after the Hijrah, the Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him, sent letters to all the chiefs and kings of countries within reach of Arabia, inviting them to Islam. Some, like Heraclius, the Emperor of Rome, read the letter and considered the invitation seriously, but was prevented from embracing Islam by his own weaknesses. He was not even prepared to follow Christianity, much less embrace some unknown Arab merchant, that too at the risk of losing the support of his generals and priests, and possibly losing his throne. Parvez, or Khosrow, the mighty king of Persia, disdainfully tore the letter in shreds in the presence of the envoy who had brought it, and instructed the governor of his Arabian province of Yemen, Badhan, to go and teach a lesson to the madman of Medina who dared to write him such a letter. The Negus of Abyssinia, on the other hand, who had earlier welcomed Muslims to his country and provided them with refuge, was ready to accept the invitation to embrace Islam. Amongst the chiefs to whom the letter was sent was one named Thumama, chief of the Banu Hanifa, in Yamama, in Najd. Thumama, up until then, had heard about Muhammad, but had avoided having any dealings with Muslims one way or another. He was not going to get involved in petty squabbles between the Quraysh and one of their rebellious sons. But when the invitation to join Islam came to him personally, he was outraged. Why, that renegade dares to address me, Thumama, chief of the Banu Hanifa, to join his bunch of nonsensical heretics? How dare he? Who does it take me for? This shall not pass unnoticed. He has been a thorn in the side of the Quraysh for some time. This insult provides me with an excuse to wipe him out. Then we shall hear no more of heretical messages and insulting invitations. From that day, Thumama began scheming and plotting to kill the blessed Prophet. He and his men never missed an opportunity to attack him or try to ambush him. Most of the attempts failed because of the vigilance of the blessed Prophet's companions, although one attempt would have succeeded if a distant uncle of Thumama's, a Muslim, had not at the last moment got word to the blessed Prophet, thereby saving his life. This did not stop Thumama. He continued raiding and attacking the Muslims, and when his men were clever enough to ambush one, they were ordered to inflict on him a slow, painful death. The blessed Prophet was left no alternative but to pronounce a death sentence upon Thumama, which meant that if ever he were caught by the Muslims, he would be put to death. The time came for the annual pilgrimage to Makkah, Thumama used to make the journey alone from Yamama to Mecca. He knew that wherever he stopped on the way, he would be an honored guest. For the times when he had to set up camp alone, he was amply stocked with food and supplies, besides the usual offerings needed for the sacrifice to his idols. One evening he found himself off the usual path, and although he did not realize it, close to Medina. As night fell, he prepared to make camp. He unfolded his bedding, placed a water bag by his head, and built up the small fire he had made to keep off wild animals. Finally, he settled down and was soon asleep. Not far away, a party of Muslims set out on patrol from Medina in search of spies and enemies. These intruders, if given a chance, would plunder, loot, and kill the Muslims, so the Blessed Prophet had organized these patrols as a means of protection. The night was as black as ink. There was not a star in the sky, nor a moon yet risen, when the patrol came over a hill and spotted the glowing embers of Thumama's campfire. "Approach with caution," advised the leader of the party as they stealthily crept forward. When they had surrounded the camp, the leader called out, "You there! Get up and identify yourself." Thumama leapt up and reached for his sword, but seeing himself surrounded, settled down again. "Your name and identity?" repeated the leader. "Where are you heading? What is your business here?" Thumama was beginning to realize who the men were. He certainly was not going to give his name at any cost. "Where do you come from? Your name?" Still, Thumama refused to answer. "Then, if you won't answer our question, we can only suspect you are here for the wrong reasons. Come with us." Thumama was a fearless man and very proud. He stood up with dignity, folded his belongings, and walked off in front of them as if he were going by his own choice. The patrol was made up of Ansars, who were not at all familiar with the Yamamites. They had no idea that they had arrested a high chief of the Banu Hanifa, one of their fiercest enemies. "If he is a spy," said one, "the Blessed Prophet will tell us what to do with him." Arriving at Medina, they led Thumama to the mosque and tied him to one of the pillars. Soon after dawn, the Blessed Prophet came from his home to the mosque, noticed the prisoner tied to the pillar, and immediately recognized Thumama. The patrol had been waiting all this time to find out who it was they had arrested. "This is Thumama, chief of the Bani Hanifa of Yamama," he told the companions. If they did not know him by sight, they certainly recognized the name. "He who treacherously murdered our brothers and plotted time after time to kill you?" "Yes," replied the Blessed Prophet, and to the surprise of the companions he added, "And I want you to treat him well." He then walked by Thumama without saying a word and began to lead the prayers. Thus Thumama, whether he wanted it or not, witnessed for the first time the Muslim prayers and heard the recitations of the Quran.
وعرضنا جهنم يومئذ للكافرين عرضا الذين كانت أعينهم في غطاء عن ذكري وكانوا لا يستطيعون سمعا أفحسب الذين كفروا أن يتخذوا عبادي من دوني أولياء إنا أعتدنا جهنم للكافرين نزلا.
The first thing the Blessed Prophet did upon returning to his quarters, which led directly into the mosque, was to ask his family to prepare the very best food they had, and to milk the she-camel every morning and evening, so that Thumama would have plenty of fresh milk. One of the companions was then asked to untie Thumama's hands so that he could eat some of the delicious food. The companion could not believe his eyes when he saw the meal which the blessed Prophet had ordered for his enemy. "I thought we would be ordered to execute him, not feed him like a king," he exclaimed to the others. After Thumama had eaten his fill, the blessed Prophet came to see him and said, "Now, Thumama, what do you have to say?" Thumama, who had really enjoyed his meal, looked up at the blessed Prophet with a little more respect. "Muhammad, all is well with me. If you kill me, then so be it. If you show me kindness, I shall be grateful. If it is wealth and riches you need, I can provide them. The choice, of course, is yours," answered Thumama in a calm voice. Thumama was prepared to accept his fate with dignity. But the blessed Prophet left him without saying a word, and did not speak to him again for 2 days, during which time he ordered that Thumama be served the very best food and fresh camel milk. On the 3rd day, the blessed Prophet approached him again. "Well, Thumama, what have you to say to me?" "Look, Muhammad," he answered, "it is like this. I am prepared to die, if that is what you decide. If you continue treating me as you have been doing, I shall be grateful. And if it is money you want, you know full well that I can provide you with a generous ransom. There, you have it." The blessed Prophet stood looking at him for a moment, and then, without replying, walked off. Another day came and went. Thumama began to feel more like a guest than a prisoner. Not only had he been given excellent meals worthy of the chief that he was, but he had been entertained daily by the gatherings and prayers of the blessed Prophet and his companions. "It is not so bad, after all, being a prisoner of this curious man. At least he's a man of honor, from what I can see." The next day the blessed Prophet returned and once again asked Thumama the same question. "Thumama, what have you to say to me?" "Thumama, what have you to say now?" Thumama couldn't figure out what the blessed Prophet wanted of him. "Don't you understand what I am saying, Muhammad? I repeat that I am at your service. You may kill me, feed me, or ask for my wealth. It is all the same to me." "All right," answered the blessed Prophet, and turning to the companions ordered, "Let him go." 2 men came forward, untied Thumama's wrists, and released him. Thumama was dumbfounded. What kind of a man was this? Did he not realize that he, Thumama, had scorned his letter, killed his men, and plotted many times to take his life? Thumama took a step forward, and the companions who surrounded him made way for him to walk off, a free man. Upon reaching the outskirts of the city, he was no longer so sure of himself. It was as if his whole world had been turned around, and the direction of his life pointed elsewhere. He felt like a different man. He walked on until he reached a garden with a cool spring and a grove of trees, where he sat down for a moment, trying to collect his thoughts. He had no desire to return to his home, nor did he any longer feel hatred for the blessed Prophet and his followers. He had absolutely no wish to go anywhere except back to where he had just come from, the blessed Prophet's mosque. Leaning over the cool stream, he carefully performed ablutions as he had seen the companions doing. Then, adjusting his clothes as neatly as possible and smoothing down his beard, he walked with a firm step back to the blessed Prophet's mosque. Some companions saw him coming. "Isn't that Thumama coming this way?" they called to the others. Thumama looked neither right nor left. Stepping forward into the assembly, he faced the blessed Prophet and announced, "I, Thumama, chief of the Banu Hanifa of Yamama, declare and witness, there is but one God, and you, Muhammad, are his messenger." The companions looked at one another with surprise and joy. "Muhammad," continued Thumama, My God, there was no face on this earth which I hated more than yours, and now there is none that I love more. Of all the religions, yours I despise the most, and now there's none other I would rather give my life for. Yes, and there was no city I abhorred more than this one, your city of Medina, and now I find it the dearest of all cities because it is the home of my beloved Prophet and his companions, Muhammad. And here Thumama's voice dropped, and he became more humble. I have shed the blood of many of your followers. How will I ever atone for that? The blessed Prophet answered simply, There lies no blame on you, Thumama. Indeed, Islam erases all the sins that a person has committed previously. You have been awarded the highest of awards, that of entering Islam. There could not have been greater mercy or grace bestowed upon you. Thumama's face radiated joy and gratefulness at these words. Placing his hand on his breast, he vowed, By God, from now on I pledge my life, my property, and my soul to help you bring idol worshippers to Islam, and those that refuse I shall pursue more fiercely than I did your followers. He now dropped his hand and resumed in a more normal tone, Messenger of God, when your patrol arrested me, I was going on pilgrimage to Mecca. What shall I do now? You shall go on pilgrimage, answered the Prophet, but not to the idols, which you now know to be worthless. Come, I shall show you how to perform the pilgrimage according to Islam. And so saying, the blessed Prophet instructed Thumama in the verses and actions and postures for the occasion. Shortly after this, Thumama arrived in Mecca. As he made his way through the streets to the heart of the town, he announced loudly what he had learned from the blessed Prophet. I come at your bidding, O Lord. I come at your bidding. I come at your bidding. There is none like unto you. I come at your bidding. All praise and bounty belong to you, and the kingdoms of the heavens and earth too, and there is none like unto you. In so doing, Thumama was one of those Muslims who entered Makkah openly declaring his intention of performing the lesser pilgrimage of Kaaba, the Umrah. What a stir Thumama's cry caused in Makkah that day. Men rushed from their houses to see what the commotion was. Some, when they heard the announcement, came brandishing their swords and threatened to attack him. Thumama completely ignored their threats. As one young man lunged at him, an elder of the Quraysh stopped his hand. Idiot, he cried. Do you not see who it is? It is Thumama himself of the Banu Hanifa. If you damage a hair of his beard, the grain supplies to Makkah will be stopped. Some of the elders approached Thumama and tried to reason with him. Look, Thumama, what has happened to you? We cannot believe that you have given up the religion of your forefathers. How did you get led astray like this? Thumama turned on them with head held high. Indeed, I have found the best of all religions, Muhammad's religion, the religion of Islam, and furthermore, for he had seen his advantage, if you all do not join me in the worship of the one God, not a single grain of wheat from Yamama will grace your tables, for I shall instruct my tribe to block all supplies to Makkah. This is exactly what the Quraysh feared. So after shaking their heads and muttering among themselves, they said, Oh, very well, go ahead then, Thumama. We do not want you to block the grain supplies, but allow us at least to cover our ears while you shout the heresy Muhammad has taught you. And so they let him pass. Thumama performed the Umrah as he had been taught to do by the blessed Prophet, praying to the one God instead of to the many gods he had served before. But he had noticed that not one Quraysh had come to join him in prayers or to announce their intention to follow the new religion. Thumama was a man of his word and always kept his promises, whatever they were, and to whoever they were made. So upon arriving in Yamama, he gave orders to stop all shipment of grain to Makkah. Gradually, the blockade began to take effect. Supplies of grain began to dwindle, and prices rose steadily, day by day. Finally, there was no grain to be had in Makkah, nor any bread on any table. Even the wealthy Quraysh began to go hungry. The people of Makkah began to panic. If Thumama kept this up, even the children would go hungry and eventually starve to death. While conscious of the persecution and torture which they had brought upon the blessed Prophet and his people, they were forced to swallow their pride and asked him to intervene. They sent the following message to Medina. You try to always set the example of being kind to relatives. You urge the young to be merciful, yet you have not only slain the fathers of this city with the sword, you would allow their children to die of hunger. We implore you to stop the blockade, or our children will starve. As a result of this, the blessed Prophet wrote to Thumama, and Thumama, only because the blessed Prophet urged him to, ordered the supply of grain to be continued. Only because of the blessed Prophet's order do I break my word, he said. This was an example of how the blessed Prophet showed mercy and kindness to his enemies, how he won the heart of a die-hard enemy like Thumama.